You thought the Iran problem was something for diplomats to handle quietly in Geneva over tea. You thought the nuclear question was just another slow-moving crisis that you could safely ignore between news cycles. Well, here we are, because right now, as you watch this, the Middle East is on fire, and nuclear weapons are at the center of it all. Let's talk about what actually happened and what it means for all of us. Iran has been building nuclear capabilities for decades. By mid-2025, Iran had amassed roughly 972 pounds of uranium, enriched to 60% purity, just a short step away from the 90% needed for weapons-grade material. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency estimated it would take Iran probably less than 1 week to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for its first bomb, if it decided to do so. That's not a threat on the horizon. That was the situation last year. In 2024, a statement by Iranian government official Kamal Karazi stated that Iran was prepared to change its policy on nuclear armament, and that Supreme Leader Khamenei's religious fatwa against nuclear weapons was the only thing stopping them from doing so. In other words, one man's interpretation of religious law stood between Iran and the bomb. Here's the part that will haunt historians. Just days ago, Oman's foreign minister declared that Iran had agreed during indirect talks with the United States to never stockpile enriched uranium, and that Iran would degrade its existing stockpiles to the lowest level possible, converting them into fuel irreversibly. He called it a breakthrough that had never been achieved before. He said peace was within reach. A peace deal was, by all accounts, within reach, if diplomacy had just been given the space it needed. It wasn't given that space. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated but separately named military campaigns against Iran, the U.S. under Operation Epic Fury and Israel under Operation Roaring Lion, striking Iran's nuclear facilities, ballistic missile infrastructure, and military leadership. The attacks included the assassination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the man whose fatwa was the last religious barrier to Iran building nuclear weapons, killed. Iran retaliated immediately. Iran launched dozens of drones and ballistic missiles at targets in Israel and U.S. military bases in Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, disrupting global oil and gas shipments. More than 1,000 people, including children, have been killed in Iran since Saturday. Iran has been under an internet blackout for over 100 hours. Dubai's airport was struck. The U.S. Embassy in Riyadh caught fire. An AWS data center in the Gulf went dark. This is not a hypothetical. This is happening right now, this week, in March 2026. So, back to the original question. What if Iran gets the bomb? Here's the brutal irony. Should the Iranian regime survive, it may now commit to developing nuclear weapons, given that the lack of them proved no deterrent whatsoever to U.S. and Israeli military action. Think about that. The entire logic of preventing Iran from going nuclear was deterrence. The idea that if Iran felt secure enough, it wouldn't need the bomb. Instead, we've now demonstrated to every government on Earth that not having a nuclear weapon means you can be bombed, regime changed, and have your supreme leader assassinated. The lesson North Korea learned. The lesson Iran may now be permanently convinced of. Iran still possesses scientific and technical expertise, foundational infrastructure, and the capacity to revive key aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle. The status of its previously accumulated enriched uranium stocks remains uncertain, constituting a major element of strategic ambiguity. A confidential IAEA report confirmed that Iran's last verified stockpile stood at 440 kilograms of uranium, enriched to 60% purity, sufficient for as many as 10 nuclear weapons if further enriched, stored in a tunnel complex that the June 2025 strikes left structurally unaffected. Two military campaigns have made that stockpile harder, not easier to find. Nobody knows where that uranium is right now. Let that sink in. If Iran, through whatever government emerges from this chaos, eventually crosses the nuclear threshold, the consequences ripple outward like a shockwave. Saudi Arabia, which has been bombing Iran this week and having its own cities struck in retaliation, has already publicly stated it will pursue nuclear weapons if Iran does. Egypt, Turkey, the UAE. We would be looking at the most explosive region on Earth becoming a nuclear neighborhood. Multiple governments, some unstable, some authoritarian, all pointing warheads at each other with a backdrop of proxy militias, religious sectarianism, and very, very long memories. Traditional nuclear deterrence, the Cold War logic of mutually assured destruction, assumed two superpowers with rational governments, clear chains of command, and no desire to die. It gets considerably shakier when you're talking about 5 or 6 states in a region already running multiple simultaneous wars, where non-state groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis operate in the gray zone between state and militia. This is what gets lost in every military briefing and every cable news panel. There were extensive protests in Iran in early 2026, motivated by a weakened economy and struggling infrastructure, illustrating the regime's weakened legitimacy within the country. The protests were put down with extensive use of force. The Iranian people had been fighting their own government at enormous personal risk. They didn't vote for a nuclear program. They didn't vote to have their cities bombed, their internet cut off, their supreme leader's death announced on Truth Social. They're the ones dying in the rubble right now, caught between a government that oppressed them and a military campaign that claims to be liberating them. Washington appears to assume that a pro-Western successor would dismantle what remains of the nuclear program. That assumption deserves scrutiny. The United States made a similar bet in Iraq in 2003, expecting a stable, friendly government to immediately follow Saddam Hussein. Instead, it inherited a decade of instability, and Iraq had no active nuclear program. Iran does. We've seen this movie before. We didn't like the ending. The IAEA has warned that the situation is very concerning. A possible radiological release with serious consequences cannot be ruled out, including the potential necessity to evacuate areas as large or larger than major cities. That warning was issued by the UN's nuclear watchdog this week about a country whose nuclear stockpile no one can fully account for, currently being bombed. About 1/5 of the world's oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has closed it. Oil prices are surging. Tanker traffic has ground to a halt. You will feel this at your petrol station. Your supply chain will feel this. The global economy, still fragile, will feel this. The question was never really, what if Iran gets nuclear weapons? The question was always, what kind of world are we building where countries feel they need them? Where the only guarantee of sovereignty is the capacity to incinerate your neighbors? Where diplomacy gets abandoned at the last moment? Peace talks are undercut by military timetables, and we repeat the same cycles: invasion, chaos, radicalization, proliferation. And act surprised every single time? The enriched uranium is out there somewhere. The knowledge doesn't disappear. The scientists survive strikes. And now, a generation of Iranians, and every government watching from a distance, have been given a very clear lesson. If you don't have the bomb, you're vulnerable. Somehow we have to break this circle. We haven't yet.